or backgrounds and all that. Line management are going to make this happen.
Peter, management is
but we pull the strings.
Yeah, we do. But management is remote control. If
Yeah.
you're sitting in the centre of an organisation, how management gets exercised is by remote control.
Yes.
Right, so it's the people who are removed from you, frontline, primary work relationship stuff where it matters. Because that's where it's credible for people on the ground.
Yeah.
So if John, as my manager, says to me, this is the way it's going to be for you, I'll take that from John rather than somebody coming from head office to help me.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So it has to be driven right down the organisation, which is through your communication, where the guys who are frontline supervisors, the ladies, have got to own the message as much as the people who've been working on it for weeks and months.
I think, Peter, that's where now you're finding a lot of teamwork going on. People are coming together, getting the team, saying, look, this is the new role, this is the new business model, how is this going to affect us, and taking it from there and saying, how do we see this happening? What do we need to do to make sure that we are successful? Yeah. What are our priorities as a result of that? And how, who's going to do it? When is it going to be done? Etc.
So the localised team is going to define the behaviours because they're the ones that know the behaviours best. It can't be imposed on them from HR or anybody else. Come on, lads.
No. I mean, that breaks the organisation down into manageable chunks, little bits, and all those units are where the reality of change takes place. I take Mick's point. We talk a lot about change and in a very sort of overview way, but it's not, to use your great expression, the wet Wednesday morning. Unless the individual changes their behaviour down at that level, you don't get long-lasting change.
Okay, tell me this: is this an opportunity to go in and change work practices and processes, like in organisations that are being, I suppose, fairly straight in the way they do things, and they've been fairly well, almost dictated as how they want to do things. It's a chance once and for all to break that.
No, fundamentally, it's a chance to break it because you set new patterns, and then they become calcified over time, and the market moves on, and then you have to do it again, and you have to do it again, and you have to do it again. It's a constant process.
Only if it makes business sense, though. We're not changing for the sake of change.
Yeah.
Changing because the business needs to change, because the customers have a different demand.
There are some things you want to keep. There's some things you do well that you should never lose.
Okay.
And there are some things that you have to change because you have no choice but to change them.
Yeah. Okay. Look, we talked about we bring people in, managing them, measurement. I think one of the things that I found in organisations and with our own, same as everybody else, when things were good, the measurement was grand. I mean, you were measuring things pretty much by, I won't say the bank balance, but there or thereabouts. It was, and the business coming in and whatever. Most good business practice would say that you need to have more metrics in terms of actually measuring things. Is this an opportunity to do that, or is that over egging it?
Well, I think, a lot of the commentary on the current situation that's very volatile is that companies should have an obsession with metrics. In other words, because everything is so uncertain, you've got to try certain things and see what works. Yeah. And you can calibrate that for your own business.
Like what?
So you discover, if you're a selling organisation, what's your conversion rate between prospects and sales?
Yeah.
And that can vary from company to company, but it varies from company to company on the basis that the companies are trying certain things and they're identifying themselves, going back to the point we're making about teams working on what's working and not working, they're identifying what works for us. So what are the metrics that will apply to our organisation? If we discover certain metrics that work, it means they can dictate our business activities, because we know if we have X number of prospects, that should be X number of sales. Yeah. So if you can localize it to your own business, and I've been at some presentations really where that point was made in a very compelling way. The companies now need to create their own metrics and do it through maybe not trying out certain things, but developing certain approaches and see how they work.
Okay. In terms of that, Peter, I think Mick is absolutely right. And a lot of companies are doing now, they're realising that because of the way business is, they need to look at different ways of measuring. So, we've all heard of the balanced scorecard, but if you begin to look suddenly at what the bottom line is delivering, so you're asking people, look at what your customer satisfaction is, we talked about staff engagement and satisfaction, measure that, and measure the way the organisation is changing. So put those four in to every manager's goals, if you like. You need a bottom line delivery, you need your customer satisfaction, you measure that, you measure your staff satisfaction, and you measure some way the way the organisation is developing. So you're rewarding on the four dials.
Yes.
And I think that gets a focus on both the medium term, on the change, and on the long term.
And that gets embedded in pretty much all of the management meetings and everything.
Absolutely. And it's a way of running the business. You can understand it. You can spend weeks developing this stuff, but even if you take a simple model like that and say that's what we're going to value, that's what we're going to measure, So if you manage your people right, it will drive the customers, which will drive the business,
Yeah.
which will ensure the organisation will change.
Yeah, but it's all the time.
And people can understand that.
But it's keeping your score all the time. It's where under those main headings,
Yeah.
and that's something I presume. In a way, everybody talks about it in theory. And we can all sit around the table nodding our heads and saying this is the thing to do. But it wasn't actually happening that much.
No.
You know?
Well, people forgot about it during the
Yeah.
boom times,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and now it's becoming to sharp relief.
Yeah.
I think organisations are spending time and money, and they're right to, in terms of understanding, firstly, what do we need to measure?
Yeah.
And then how are we measuring?
Yeah.
And then I think critically, how do you report it?
Yeah,
Because sometimes people report
yeah,
to themselves in very narrow
yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
reach. They need to go out. It needs to be very clear.
And of course, all that needs to feed back into performance management.
Yeah.
And people actually then
Maybe
get
performance
rewarded
management
for what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
okay.
a very good saying that I came across on that, which is that the job teaches you how to do it.
Yeah.
The job teaches you how to do it. So sometimes it's not a case of people going to conferences or going off on training programs.
Yeah.
The key messages are there in front of you,
Yeah.
actually, if you're alive to them. Or
Yeah.
if you have structures in place which are for continuous learning, and you're seeing
Mm-hmm.
what are the messages I'm continuously getting, because that's where the real value is, not
Yeah.
necessarily in going away to generic
Yeah.
training
Okay.
programs or development events.
Talking about training, but they're necessary, and we'll talk about those in a second. Just that's something that came in here on the email, which is basically changing the company staff profiles and defining more appropriate skill sets is all very possible. It's the effect on the company culture that's less manageable. Any thoughts on the company, on the culture?
I think culture is one of those things that if you go and pick up the textbooks, you read it is one of those sort of academic-y type things, but it does live out every day across the organisation. The first thing you have to do is when you're starting off with something like this, going back to the points that have been made earlier, is in setting your new direction. You've got to take a view as to, well, in getting there, what needs to change culture in terms of how we interact with one another, how we interact with our customers.
Yeah.
And when you've done that, you begin to articulate what does the new look like. And back to what John was saying earlier, you start then putting behaviours in behind that support it.
Yeah.
And you punish people who don't work within the new culture.
Okay, culture. I heard culture defined recently as what we do around here
That's it.
when no one's looking.
Wow.
I would say
No.
That's your
no.
definition.
No,
That's your last definition. The last point, your definition.
No, it wasn't my definition. It was a definition of a chief executive in Dublin who was a very, very successful guy, and I thought that last bit was the bit that actually that really worked. It's true. It's okay. Culture is great when management are around watching what you're doing. Culture is what we do instinctively because that's the way it's done.
Yeah.
But it's learned, it's
But
embedded,
how do
and it's very slow
you
to change.
how do you make it happen?
That's the problem, it's slow to change.
Very
Yeah.
slow.
And first of all, you've got to analyse and understand what your culture is.
Yeah.
And I mean, Martin would have done a lot of that in using things like the cultural way. And then you say, okay, knowing that's our culture, then what's the ideal culture? Where are we trying to get to?
Yeah.
And work hard at it, but it's about behaviour change again.
But culture is behaviour, isn't that right?
But I think it is. I think the best companies, some of the best performing companies, never mention the word culture or never have debates on culture.